Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight today for us to check in with our friend Liz Peek. She's a columnist for Fiscal Times and FoxNews.com, and get her thoughts about the Republican National Convention into day number 3 now there in Cleveland. And it has been pretty exciting at times to see what's going on. Liz, good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Are you there?
I'm not. I actually was going to go, and various things got complicated, so I'm just watching it on TV, I'm afraid, like everybody else.
Well, that's why you have a smile on your face.
Well, yeah, it's okay. But I have to say, I was watching it Monday with sort of indifference or sort of worried that it wasn't going too well. Last night was a barn burner, and I think anyone who saw Donald Trump Jr. speak must have come away kind of uplifted and excited, possibly for the first time. And I don't mean that other people haven't spoken well, but I thought he did an unbelievably good job, not only of presenting his father as a sort of respectable and interesting and agreeable human being, but also just laid out the agenda that the Republicans should be talking about. I thought it was really a masterful performance.
That seems to be the consensus this morning. Everybody's giving it a thumbs up, and he had done an incredible job. It also says a lot about the family, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of the family, and that of course was quite intentional, because behind all the bluster and the bullying and insults and so forth, there apparently does live a pretty agreeable human being, and the measure of that is that his family, including his ex-wives, are supportive of him, and they've all showed up in Cleveland. And I did think, by the way, that Tiffany, his daughter, did a lovely job considering her age and stuff. She was amazingly poised, and again gave the audience a little bit of flesh to hang on the bones. I mean, a little bit of rounding out of the character of Donald Trump. I don't know about other parents. I didn't look at every report card my kids brought home and make notes in the margin. I mean, I think that's just totally charming. So, you know, the point of this convention, more than perhaps any of its predecessor similar events, has been to kind of reintroduce Donald Trump, get away from the big headline speeches where he has always sort of, dominated the news hour with something unconventional, sometimes something outrageous, and find out what kind of man we're talking about here. And I thought between Tiffany and Donald Jr., you really came away feeling pretty good about Donald Trump, some guy who can talk to people in a real way, teaches his kids how to work hard. You know, I admire those traits, and that's what we've tried to do with our kids. And I think that was really a home run last night.
Great. Let's go behind the scenes a little bit. It was a little bumpy getting through the votes. Actually, it was a little bumpy on Monday when they started, because there was an effort to change the rules. I've been to 3 conventions, especially when I was chairman of the state. I've been to 2, and I know that those conventions and those committee meetings can get a little contentious. But that seemed to get calmed down, actually hammered down.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the right thing?
I do think it was the right thing. Look, Donald Trump won the nomination fair and square. He also, by the way, won the Rules Committee meeting, which set the rules for the convention. And actually, I don't really think it was much of a revolt. It was a mini revolt, to be sure. But I think, look, the media, and particularly Fox News and CNN, have agreed to cover this thing hammer to hammer, and they are looking for anything to make the viewers wake up and pay attention, because some of it's pretty dead time, let's face it. So, you know, I thought that they gave Mike Lee on Fox, for example, gave Mike Lee an enormous amount of airtime. Look, Mike Lee's guy lost. Cruz was not going to be the candidate. He lost. And by the way, polling shows he's not a terrific candidate anyway. So as someone finally said, in the midst of all the conjecture about a revolt, about, you know, staging a coup, et cetera, who's the candidate? If it isn't Ted Cruz, who are they got in mind? And, you know what? They don't have anybody. So let's coalesce around what basically Chris Christie came to talk about last night, which was the shared animosity and hostility a lot of Republicans, or I should say disdain really, a lot of Americans and a lot of Republicans have for Hillary Clinton. That is the unifying message of this convention so far. Although, as I said last night, we finally also got some excitement going about the candidate. But Hillary Clinton is a really terrible person and a terrible candidate. And I don't say those kinds of things in a shallow way. I mean, I think she really is a terrible person. I think she's beyond corrupt and dishonest. A lot of voters are aware of that, but you know, that's not enough to win a campaign, but I think it's a good start, and that's really what Republicans have focused on. Very well said.
The other thing is, it wasn't an all-out endorsement, but it was a call for unity from Paul Ryan last night. It fell short from putting his arms around Trump. And then Mitch McConnell's speech, he actually kind of got booed coming out. Some people was booing him. And the ratings this morning show that when McConnell spoke, the ratings went down. What's your thoughts?
Well, look, Mitch McConnell, I think, actually is treated very poorly by people on the far right, hard-nosed conservatives. He has done, I think, a good job of putting the Senate back to work. I think he's been a stalwart Republican leader for many years now. You know, Ted Cruz and some others, Mike Lee, et cetera, started this sort of movement, anti-establishment movement, and basically have been scornful and disrespectful of any effort to work with the other side and get the work of the nation done. And I think, you know, whereas that's appealing, and I get it because I also am angry about some of the things that Republicans have allowed to pass, excuse me, in the last several years. I think at the end of the day, it is important to function. I think it's important for Congress to work on some of the things that we all think are important, like tax reform, like immigration reform, et cetera. Right now, we've been on hold for several years. I think Harry Reid contributed to that. I think the extreme partisanship of the Obama White House contributed to it. I think Mitch McConnell, and by the way, I think John Boehner, both worked to some degree to try and thaw the ice and get the wheels of government turning again. And I know that's an unpopular idea because it means caving in to a lot of people, but it doesn't really, not every compromise has to be viewed as a terrible concession to the other side. There is something to be said for bipartisan legislation. Historically, a lot of good things have come out of that, like welfare reform, for example. So, you know, I think we just kind of should tone it down. And all of this is very good for one person. All of this rancor has lifted the visibility of Ted Cruz. I'm not a fan of Ted Cruz because I think he's been disruptive and unhelpful to the Republican Party. I don't want another 4 years of a Democrat president. And I think Ted Cruz is sort of on the fence about that.
Now, what happens at the convention really is now under the auspices of Donald Trump. I mean, he probably has to okay all the speakers and everything that goes on. He certainly controlled the Rules Committee, et cetera, et cetera. So he had to approve Ted Cruz speaking tonight. I would say that's big of him.
Yeah, I think it's great. It'd be great if Ted Cruz comes in with a speech that's not all about Ted Cruz, with an eye towards 2020. What I've heard is that the speech has not been vetted. It's the only major speech in that situation. So we shall see. I think it is a little risky, but if Cruz knows what's good for him, he'll at least sound like a Republican who would like Hillary Clinton not to be the next president. That's his task. I hope he's up to it.
All right, let me take a break here, Liz. When we come back, as you know, Donald Trump last night appeared on videotape and said something to me that was really a key, and I really hope we hear details. But he said Thursday he was going to spell out his policies. And let's see what that really looks like. We'll take a quick break. Delighted to have with us today Liz Peek, columnist for Fiscal Times and FoxNews.com. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back, and a delight and an honor to have with us our good friend Liz Peek. She's a columnist for Fiscal Times and FoxNews.com, sharing with us her thoughts and comments on the Republican National Committee, or Convention, I should say, which is now in its third day. Highlighted tonight is Senator Ted Cruz, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Ought to be pretty interesting as it moves forward tonight, but we're all kind of just on tilt from a terrific speech last night by Donald Trump Jr. There's no question about it. He gave an incredible speech, and I think also gave us an insight to the Trump family, and it's being talked about quite high, as high regards today. So, Liz, first of all, if my wife saw your blue couch and ottoman, she'd go crazy. It's beautiful. All right, so let's come back to a couple of things as we head into all of this. Do you think the party is unified?
No, I don't think it's totally unified. We've obviously seen plenty of evidence to the contrary. There's people on the far right, and there are moderates who are not going to be behind Donald Trump. Again, the most unifying thing in the party is, I think, a conviction that we don't want 4 more years of President Obama's policies. That's what's been promised by Hillary Clinton, and I really think it's pretty hard to find a Republican, who thinks that that's the right thing.
Newt said Newt said this morning on the news that the most unifying moment of the Republican Party will be at the end of the Philadelphia convention.
That's probably a fair statement. Look, I think, you were talking before the break about wanting to hear from Donald Trump about his policies. I think we all want to hear more policies sketched out by Donald Trump. And I think some people were disappointed that last night there wasn't more discussion about how to bring jobs back to America, et cetera. Look, we have a candidate unlike any other in the history of this party, I believe, who is an amateur. And in the course of this campaign, which has now gone on for about a year exactly, he has proposed various things. They are not fully fleshed out, as some other candidates' policies would have been. But I think his instincts are pretty good. And I think that what people are counting on, and I think what we'll see in the months going forward, is that people like Paul Ryan, by the way, will be called upon, as will other advisors like Larry Kudlow, Steve Moore, Art Laffer, some of the others, to come up to flesh out the policy ideas that Donald Trump has sort of instinctively, and make them much more detailed and much more something that can be talked about and debated in open forum. At the moment, those policy ideas are clearly mostly about trade, immigration, agreements like the nuclear agreement with Iran that he disagrees with, et cetera. We know kind of where he stands. We just don't know on exactly what the ground is made of that he stands on. So there's a lot more to be done in this campaign. There's no doubt about it.
So how critical is it on Thursday that he actually gets specific? Because if he stays vague and they leave the convention, I can't help but think that that would be a negative.
I think if he does what his son did last night, he doesn't have to go into micro policy agenda items. I think he needs to lay out what's wrong, what we can fix, how we're going to fix it in general terms. You're not going to go into infinite, small bore tax policy issues in a speech like Thursday night. What you can talk about, you can't just say you're going to make America great again. You're going to talk about a little bit about why. And you can't just talk about less regulation. It would be nice to have, by the way, what Donald Trump, again, Jr. did last night, talking about Dodd-Frank. I know this is a no-go zone. We're not supposed to talk about loosening federal financial regulations because people are so anti-bank. But the truth is, if you talk to small businesses, accessing credit right now is a real chokehold on economic growth. And part of that is because the banks are so intimidated and they're so fearful of being called up on various issues that they are not lending to anyone except AAA credits. Okay, that's an actual problem that is stifling economic growth. That has to be addressed. It may not be popular, but it has to be addressed because otherwise we are not going to ramp up growth. And let's remember, every problem this country has can be reduced, if not eliminated, by growing the economy. That is our number one goal. It has never been the number one goal of Obama and Hillary Clinton. Their goal is to redistribute the wealth and income that we already have. And that's not just talking off the top of my head. It is actually true. Obamacare was not about growing the economy. It was something ladled onto a struggling economy, which arguably stifled the green shoots that were coming up at that point. And it is something that, in fact, I think has hurt our ability to rebound. But there are many such issues and policies, the environmental regulations that President Obama has laid out. The number one job creator for the last 7 years has been the energy industries, and Obama has done everything and within his power to stifle that recovery in energy. I mean, things like that really have to change. And I think a lot of people know that, including Donald Trump. He needs to talk about those things, but it has to be top line. He can't get into detail.
Very well said. If Donald Trump was to call you and say, hey, Liz, I want to have you be a part of an economic advisory committee to me, and the major thing I want you to come up with is a way to reduce the 19, maybe 20 some odd $1 trillion debt, how would you go about that?
Well, it's a really good question. First of all, I would begin the line item veto in the budget process, which everyone talks about and no one does. I would get very tough on things like, I think it's now 67 overlapping job training programs that we have, none of which, only one of which has ever been assessed for its effectiveness. There is a real problem in the way our country is run. There are many problems probably, but here's one. One is that all legislators get a pat on the back and go home to their constituents and are proud to talk about what they have newly enacted, new bills. They never get rid of the old bills. So we have these millefeuille, 1,000-layer legislative issues which are totally gummed up by existing laws and programs. The problem is the programs never get defunded. So I would just go with a meat cleaver after some of the stuff that's redundant and unnecessary at the federal government. I am someone who really thinks that a lot of the power should be going back to the states. I think local politicians, local authorities are much more accountable to their constituents. Your local mayor and your governor listen to people in their community. It's a much more effective way of governing than having the federal government increasingly take hold on every issue. And by the way, if you look at Hillary Clinton's economic program, her civil or criminal justice reform program, everything on her website, it all comes back to the federal government having even more power over individuals in our country. And I think that's a disaster.
Wow. Liz, are you worried like I am that something's happened to the rule of law in this country? And I'm referring to FBI Director Comey lays out Hillary's reason to be indicted but doesn't do a recommendation. Attorney General Loretta Lynch pulled before the committee to testify and basically just, answered nothing. Something's happened at that level, and it's scary.
Well, I don't think it's just at the Justice Department. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, and I think this is a reasonable thing to say, I think that the Obama White House is extraordinarily politicized. I can't think of an agency of this government that is not politicized, whether it's the IRS and Lois Lerner taking the fifth before Congress, or the Veterans Administration, where you've had people lying about what's going on there. Look, it's a very political White House. There's been an awful lot of, I think, lying about policy mistakes and goofs. Let's go back to Eric Holder being the first attorney general in the history of the country to be found in contempt of Congress. That was a fairly stunning achievement by this Justice Department. I'm not concerned really about the rule of law because, again, other than the things that we have just talked about, generally speaking, that is in the hands of your local cops, your district attorneys, et cetera. But I got to tell you, it's pretty demoralizing to those people when the top cop in the nation lets someone off the hook because of political connection and importance. And that's basically what happened here. I don't know that Comey wasn't right in thinking that it was going to be a tough thing to prosecute Hillary Clinton. I'm pretty sure he thought it was going to be politically dangerous to prosecute Hillary Clinton. And that is somewhat shameful, I think.
Out of that came the possibility of a perjury charge from Congress. I mean, so will that go anywhere?
I don't know. It's a good question. It seems to me she certainly has lied so much. It's a little, again, disheartening that the FBI isn't on top of that already. But I think there's probably grounds for a perjury charge. She's lied to everybody. So, did she lie before Congress? Yes, I believe she did.
Something Donald Trump Jr. said last night, that she couldn't even pass a background check, and yet we're going to elect her as president. I mean, that could be the one-line campaign all the way through until November.
Yeah, no, it's a great line. And I think, by the way, it's true. I don't know how many, my son actually had to get top security clearance for something he was doing, and it is a very rigorous thing. And I think Hillary Clinton most assuredly would fail.
Wow. Donald Trump, his business acumen tells me that he gets banking, he understands the trade issue, and with that business background is what's needed now to face the economic challenges of the country. Do you agree?
I think it's very important. I think the one thing that was really outstanding about the Obama White House when it was put together is that there was not a single individual with private sector experience. Do you remember that? I mean, that was sort of like we all did a data check, and we had never seen a White House that didn't have at least one business leader in it, and this one was the first. Donald Trump certainly comes to a discussion of the economy with some real-world experience. As Donald Trump Jr. said, his signature has been on paychecks, not Hillary Clinton's. I think that's very important, and I think it gives him some insight. But, I also would like to say here that a lot of the things that Donald Trump has been pilloried for and mischaracterized in the press has been really intentionally mischaracterized. For example, on trade, he is against the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Obama is so keen on. It doesn't mean he's anti-trade. Let's remember, there's no law that says that every trade deal has to be thousands of pages long and across many continents and countries. One of the things we've seen, I would cite Obamacare as a really good example of this, is that when you have thousands of pages of legislation, it tends to get messed up. And there's all these unforeseen consequences. In trade, we can have bilateral agreements. There was a big article in the Times recently about how Ireland is going to be so badly hit because much of its export goes to England. There's nothing to say that the UK, when it exits the EU, can't have a bilateral agreement with Ireland. That's just sort of stupid. And I think, and I kind of agree with Donald Trump, by the way, when you look at, I think it was an MIT study, it possibly was Harvard, but I think it came out of MIT, assessing the outcome of the TPP and who did they think would be the victors or the winners from that gigantic, sprawling trade agreement? Malaysia and Vietnam, not the United States. The United States was expected to get a fractional increase in growth, if anything. So spare me the condemnation of Donald Trump being anti-trade. That's not the case. He's just simply anti-trade agreements, which have worked to hurt our country.
Well, you're terrific. That's really well said. One last quick question. We've never seen an election cycle like this before, and we've never ended up with two candidates that are so polar opposites as we have now. And in spite of all the polls, the very fact that that Donald Trump has ended up becoming the Republican nominee, and he won fair and square. He beat out 16 other candidates, and he became the nominee. It appears that the swing in the mood of the country is back to the right, in spite of the polls. You think that's true?
I'm not sure if it's true. I think it's a response to maybe what's going on in the Democratic Party, which is veered so sharply to the left, mostly because of Bernie Sanders and his supporters. Maybe there is some reaction to that. If you're facing a socialist, maybe you tend to go a little bit right. But I'm not sure we've seen a huge upsurge in social conservatism. And I really kind of divide this issue into two: social issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, and then also fiscal conservatism. I'm a fiscal conservative. I am not so interested in the Republican Party getting hung out to dry on social issues. I'm sort of in Mitch Daniels' camp that the country's biggest challenges are how to deal with what you described as, tens of trillions of dollars in debt, something that no one is talking about right now and that we really need to talk about. These are, here's just a sort of data point on that. Right.
Okay, well, we got a frozen Skype. Sorry about that. Liz Peek, she is a columnist with Fiscal Times and FoxNews.com, and she's terrific. So you can go to lizpeek.com and check out her website and correspond with her there. Sorry about that, but we value her input. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.